are some upsides to the conflict in Ukraine. If it escalates and Britain gets nuked, I might finally be able to afford a house in London. I mean, that's assuming that the reduced demand caused by buyers being evaporated isn't offset by the reduction in supply caused by houses being evaporated. My shares in BAE Systems should get a bump from increased sales of anti-tank weapons, and all of Ukrainian men are ordered to stay and fight, so the refugees arriving in the UK from this conflict will be hot women from a country that shares our values, instead of fighting-age men from countries that want to destroy us. And it's been a great time for comedians to show their bravery. The president of Ukraine, Zelensky, is a former comedian, and he defied the Russians and stayed in Kiev to fight to the last man. And also stand-up comedian Louis C.K. went ahead with a show in Kiev, taking advantage of another chance to show everyone his massive balls. But overall, I think we can agree that it's generally a bad thing and Putin is a bad guy for doing it. But what surprised me most was the response from some people on the right, licking Putin's balls, saying how great he is and how it's the West's fault and Ukraine deserves it. I mean, I expect these kinds of batshit takes from the woke left, who didn't disappoint, to be fair. Gary Lineker tweeted, "All those millions spent on a so-called nuclear deterrent, madness, managing to forget that when Ukraine voted for independence from Russia in 1991, it had 1,700 nuclear warheads. That was the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And Ukraine agreed to destroy these weapons after promises from Russia that it wouldn't invade. But it turned out that nuclear weapons are a better deterrent than Russian promises. Stick to flogging crisps to fat kids, Gary, you dope." An interesting fact, Ukraine's nukes mainly had a range of 5,000 to 10,000 kilometres because they were aimed at the USA, so they'd only really be able to hit the far side of Russia. Someone asked why the world couldn't just airlift everyone out of Ukraine to live somewhere else and let Russia have the country. I mean, airlifting 45 million people to Wales from a country with no viable airports and lots of missiles in the air, and that sounds quite logistically challenging. But when someone pointed out that the Ukrainians might want to stay in their homeland because it's their homeland, she condemned that as nationalism. This is where the woke left is in 2022. And she's not some 13-year-old greenhair, by the way. She's a journalist who writes for TechCrunch, The Week, Vice, and Daily Beast. And bizarrely, she's got an OnlyFans, so if you wanted to know what her thoughts on foreign policy were while paying to look at her anus, you can do that. Speaking of which, please don't forget that the real victims of this conflict are internet whores. OnlyFans have cut off Russia and Belarus, which angered this OnlyFans model. "Now I can't buy food and pay rent." I don't know, maybe get a real job? I think the military are hiring right now. And the people who see everything through the prism of race insisted that Putin benefits from white privilege. He doesn't. He benefits from dictators' privilege. It's much more effective. "I just can't see a scenario in which a black man running Russia would be allowed to invade Ukraine with no devastating consequences." Yeah, you can't see this scenario because there are virtually no black people in Russia. Black Russian is a cocktail, not an ethnic group. This person tried to get a hashtag started that goes, "Ukraine is George Floyd." I feel like I'm watching George Floyd die again, only the country version. I mean, the country version? He gets kneeled on while people play banjos and sing about their wife leaving them? And loads of Remainers tweeted about how the UK shouldn't have left the EU because for some reason they think the EU is a military alliance. It's not. NATO is a Western military alliance and we're still in it. Being militarily allied with America and France is slightly more useful against Russian tanks than having a trade framework that allows us to sell cheese in Luxembourg. And Jeremy Corbyn couldn't wait to find a way to wedge Israel in somehow. "We should support the immediate and unconditional recognition of the state of Palestine." Why now, Jeremy? Can't you just put your hard-on for Palestine back in your pants for one day? Corbyn is also speaking at this Stop the War rally, who should really be called Stop the West, because they never have an issue with a country going to war if it's not a Western country. They don't even recognise Russia as an aggressor. They seem to think that it's NATO that's invaded Ukraine. Is there anything that the left cannot be wrong about? 11 MPs signed a Stop the War letter. They signed this letter to appease Putin and call for nuclear disarmament, because the one thing that would really help right now is removing our ability to vaporise the Kremlin. The signatories are all dunces like Diane Abbott, who managed to fit both Putin's balls in her mouth to get tickled by the shit coming out of it.
The claims that Russia is the aggressor should be treated skeptically.
Who is voting for this woman? A plank of wood with a face drawn on it would be a more credible and competent politician. Let's never forget the time she put her shoes on the wrong feet. North of the border, Scottish National Party Minister Alan Smith says he's monitoring the situation. I'm sure it'll be immensely reassuring to Ukrainians to know that what's effectively a provincial town council is keeping an eye on the situation. Alan, in the same tweet, also sinisterly tells people to watch their comments, which is reminiscent of when he was caught threatening a Scottish woman that she's on an SNP's database as being problematic.
How does asking you when you're going to have an actual sit-down surgery look obnoxious?
Well, I'm afraid that your reputation does precede you. You're in our database as having been quite aggressive to previous canvassers.
Really?
I'm afraid you are.
I think Alan would actually love being an apparatchik in a Soviet police state. Occupy Democrats applauded the distribution of automatic rifles to civilians in Kyiv after tweeting that no civilian needs a gun, regardless of whatever mental gymnastics you do. I'd love to see what mental gymnastics they actually did do to change their minds. But we expect the left to be idiotic, hypocritical and unpatriotic. What's really surprised me about the responses to Putin's invasion of Ukraine is how some people on the right responded. To me, the essence of being right-wing is that we're patriotic defenders of democracy, freedom and Western liberalism, all that's good in the world. Instead, many on the right are in the grip of this unpatriotic, anti-democratic mania. Legitimate complaints like the government put us into a harsh lockdown, or critical race theory is nonsense, or the media lied to us about COVID, or I don't like this pronoun nonsense, or these people are getting fired for expressing opinions, have all somehow transmogrified into the West is weak and it hates me, so I like Putin. People talk of being Putin-pilled and saying he's attacking the deep state in Ukraine. They believe every bit of Russian propaganda and question everything that's coming out of the Western media, like somebody in 1942 being like, oh, but what if the buildings at Auschwitz really are for growing tomatoes? And prominent right-wingers are coming out with weird praise for Putin. Mike Pompeo, who's Secretary of State under Trump and usually pretty hawkish and smart, described Putin as talented, savvy, very shrewd and a capable statesman. He said in an interview, I have enormous respect for Putin and I've been criticised for saying that. Yeah, because he's none of those things. He's a total dick, and he's making a total mess of this. The dangerous thing is that any praise of Putin by prominent people on the right fuels Russian propaganda. A speech by Tucker Carlson, who's a presenter on Fox, defending Putin was broadcast in Russia with subtitles.
Has Putin ever called me a racist? Has he threatened to get me fired for disagreeing with him? Has he shipped every middle-class job in my town to Russia? Did he manufacture a worldwide pandemic that wrecked my business and kept me indoors for 2 years? Is he teaching my children to embrace racial discrimination? Is he making fentanyl? Is he trying to snuff out Christianity? Does he eat dogs? These are fair questions, and the answer to all of them is no. Vladimir Putin didn't do any of that.
Osama bin Laden never reported me for misgendering him, but it doesn't mean he's a great guy. Conspiracy theories about Ukraine harbouring the deep state or taking part in the Great Reset were shared by the right. Just as some people on the left see racism everywhere, some people on the right see conspiracy theories everywhere. They said that the US had bioweapon labs on the border with Russia. Think about it for a minute. Why would the US put weapons labs in a country that was already partly occupied by its enemy, Russia, right on the border with Russia, where they're totally vulnerable? The mundane truth is that these biolabs aren't breeding radioactive flying monkeys or coronavirus type 2. They're for detecting diseases and food poisoning. Their locations vaguely match with bombing locations because they're in urban areas, because labs have to go in buildings and that's where the buildings are. And they're being bombed because buildings get bombed. There's no point in bombing an empty field or a river. And weirdly, left-wing people have been screaming traitor at the right. It used to be lefties like Jane Fonda who are against war and were called traitors by conservatives. Everything's flipped upside down. It's mental. So why are some people on the right suddenly abandoning the West and supporting Putin? I mean, there is this sort of sense of general malaise in the West, and I get that people in the West have felt under attack from their own increasingly authoritarian woke culture. People have to live under fear of losing their jobs or even being arrested simply for having opinions or stating facts such as biological sex exists. The COVID pandemic stripped our human rights and handed too much power to the government. The pronoun nonsense allows male rapists to go to women's prisons, and discrimination is openly displayed and encouraged against any of the left's disdained characteristics. They can be anti-white, anti-cisgender, anti-straight, anti-male, or anti-right-wing. It's even enshrined in HR guidance under the guise of diversity and inclusion. I mean, you'll never get one of these diversity and inclusion officers making sure that there's enough Brexit voters represented in BBC BBC comedy. I tell young people that we used to have straight white couples in adverts and they don't believe me. Our culture promotes victimhood and weakness. Our institutions repeat baseless mantras such as diversity is strength. I mean, to be honest, when Britain wasn't diverse, it conquered the whole world. Now it is diverse, it can't even come top 10 in the Eurovision Song Contest. Can I see some data to back up this mantra? Our military seem weak and focused on woke nonsense instead of getting good at shooting people in the face, which is the important bit of what the army do. I mean, here's the head of MI6 telling us, never mind the war in Ukraine, let's celebrate LGBT plus month. I mean, it's terrible, isn't it? He forgot to put in the rest of the letters. It's LGBTQQIP2SAA month. Whereas Putin ostensibly appears strong in traditional conservative values, standing up for indigenous Russians, Christianity, military strength. But is he? He's bad for the Russian people. The Russian economy was only the size of Spain before all this, so it's probably the size of a Tesco Extra now. And he likes locking Russian people up. There are more than twice as many political prisoners in Russia now than there were at the height of the Soviet Union. And is he the bastion of Christianity that some people see him as? I mean, he's using Islamist Chechen fighters to massacre Christian Ukrainians, so no, definitely not. And what about military strength? We at least thought he was military strong until he tried to blitzkrieg Ukraine and failed terribly. His troops are badly organised, he's strategically unskilled. His only hope was a quick blitzkrieg to Kyiv and the installation of his own puppet government. Now he's getting bogged down in this fighting. It's not going to end well for him. And Putin is tiny as well. When the elites desert him and the Russian people rise up against him, they won't have to hang him from a lamppost. They'll be able to use the bottom rung on a bar stool. Right-wing people looking for heroes should be like a woman on Tinder and only look for tall men. And look, I know wokeness is annoying, but it's not the end of Western civilization. All this gender bollocks is basically this generation's double denim and mullets. It's a trend and it'll die out as soon as the pronoun people realise how stupid they look. We didn't destroy Western democracy because of Kajagoogoo. We shouldn't destroy it because Sam Smith wants to be described as they-them. Wanting to destroy Western democracy because of wokeness is like burning down your house because you don't like the wallpaper in the bathroom. And I find this unpatriotic, anti-democratic, anti-Western mania that's gripped some people on the right very, very weird. You aren't contrarian edgelords. The new right are basically Jeremy Corbyn if he washed his pants and used deodorant. I mean, what's going on when I agree with the Taliban more than I agree with Tucker Carlson? Surely this invasion of Ukraine is a reminder that freedom, democracy and affluence are paper houses built on the conservative rocks of military might, shared liberal values and institutions that preserve our liberty. Not gonna lie, I miss Ronald Reagan. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please like and subscribe and send it to your mates if you think that they'd enjoy it as well. And if you want to support me making these videos, then consider becoming a Patreon for as little as £3 a month. That's not even a cup of coffee. You know what I mean? Jesus Christ, inflation, which is going to get worse, what with Ukraine and Russia being the source of all our wheat and energy. So yeah, anyway, let's not think about that. Yeah, so for £3 a month, you can support me making these videos, and also you get access to Patreon only content, like I do a Patreon only podcast every week, which is genuinely not shit. And you get early access to videos and other stuff, do live shows and interviews and stuff sometimes as well. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, hope you have a great week. What am I saying now? Should have just stopped a while back. Anyway, thanks for listening. Bye. Bye.